Hello, my name is Robin Walker. I'm a school teacher by day where I teach business studies. In the evenings, I teach black studies as part of adult education. And one of the core areas within black studies is African history. The book, When We Ruled, I wrote it to accomplish a number of different objectives. But the most important one was to write the very best book on black history there'd ever been. And essentially what I wanted to do was to update the findings of some of our great scholars, people like Professor Jackson, Professor Diop, Dr. Basil Davidson, and scholarship going all the way back over the last 200 years, scholarship on African history and on black history in the Caribbean and other places. And what I wanted to do was to bring all this information together and to write the most comprehensive account there's ever been, the most detailed account there's ever been, and the best illustrated account. And the idea was to put all of this information in one book where it's easily accessible. Now, the title, When We Ruled, essentially sums up the ethos of the book, which is what did black people achieve for themselves in their own time and space? And the answer is actually quite a lot. And what I show is black history goes way beyond the plantations, way beyond Malcolm X, way beyond Mary Seacole, and way beyond the man who invented the traffic lights, which is usually where most people locate black history. The book charts black history going back 8,000 years worth of written history and 5 million years of prehistory. So if we go back to the ancient periods, we then go back to the time of the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians produced great people like Hannibal the Great. They were an African people. There are coins of Hannibal that show him with a typical African type face, typical African type hair, and so forth. What distinguishes the book is that I show a key part of black culture that has hardly ever been touched on. And that is the fact that in ancient and medieval Africa, people built monuments. And one of the key factors in the book is I show that evidence. Another key issue is that people wrote books, people wrote inscriptions. And some of those medieval books are still around today, held by black families as family heirlooms that in many cases go back hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years. And my point then is to show that that heritage still exists today and people can still see it today. The significance of the image on the front cover of the book is that it's a portrait of one of the queens of ancient Egypt, Queen Taye. Some people pronounce the name Queen T. And she's one of the queens of the 18th Egyptian dynasty. And it's a very striking image, shows her as a woman of great physical beauty and so forth. Now, there is a chapter in the book where I specifically deal with black history, an overview of it from a female perspective. And it's very important to look at the prehistoric and historic achievements of women. And what I look at is things like the great queens of Egypt, the great queens of Ethiopia, the fact that when the Arabs invaded North Africa, and they've since conquered it, but it was a queen that stood up to them and said, this is not going to happen without a major battle, Queen Dahia el-Kahina. So those sorts of achievements need specifically to be highlighted and is one of the key areas where I believe it's very, very important to engage black women in history. And the best way to do it is to show that, no, the history of Africa, the history of black people is not just a history of men. In the present period, black history does occupy a somewhat low status. And my role is to raise that status so that it becomes more recognized in the mass media, more recognized in the worlds of education. And essentially it's about pushing information forward. Now, the reason why it's not been recognized as much so far is because the history of any people will reflect what their current status is. And if the current status of the people is relatively low, the current status of their history will also be relatively low. And essentially that is something that needs to be corrected. I think it's important when we address the issues surrounding 2007 to emphasize the fact that the history of black people does not begin with mass enslavement. The history of black people largely ends with mass enslavement. And the key issues are, what did black people achieve prior to that period? And I believe that that's the key area of African history to be emphasized. What did we achieve before that period?